Many characters in Marvel, DC, and other publishers have experienced death, have gone through great traumas, but only a few have had the displeasure of facing situations worse than death itself. Whether due to physical traumas, mental traumas, or even the inability to stay close to another person. Today, we will see all the characters who have gone through this kind of thing, starting with Mutant J. He is a mutant with such a tragic mutation that Wolverine felt compelled to take his life. The character considered himself just a normal teenager until the day he hit puberty, when he woke up late for school and found no one around. Thinking he was going crazy or that something had happened due to how empty the streets were, he finally saw people who began to burn when he turned around. Upon arriving at school, suddenly all the students, including his girlfriend, began to burn and melt around him. He hid in a safe place, and that's when Wolverine arrived and we understood the whole situation he was going through. Jesse's only mutant ability was to release a series of toxins, acids, and deadly poisons throughout his body, consuming organic tissue. These toxins burned and vaporized everyone around him from the inside out, and Wolverine was only able to stay near him thanks to his healing factor. But the others wouldn't have that luck. Knowing that Jesse could never have a normal life or simply be close to anyone, Wolverine killed him, even though he didn't want to do it. But continuing, Qwerty was a mutant capable of seeing the future, extremely powerful, even more powerful than Destiny, who is the main name among mutants when it comes to precognition. But her powers were her downfall. The fact that she was extremely powerful made her unable to function as a normal person. By seeing the future, we're talking about predicting every single possible and existing future possibility. Every possible future for every possible action at every moment of every day was foreseen by her. This made simple actions like choosing to turn left or right when crossing the street and similar things become torturous for her. Since seeing the possibilities caused more possibilities, it became a snowball effect where she spent most of her time in what seemed to be a vegetative coma. At a certain point, the mutant could no longer make choices, as all she saw were endless possibilities 24 hours a day, which left her catatonic. She was only able to survive because of the care of the other Morlocks. Curiously, she lost her powers after M-Day when the Scarlet Witch erased the mutant gene. But instead of finally finding peace, she ended up dying. But, still talking about mutants, one of Deadpool's most famous comics is the one where he mimics the Punisher and simply devastates the entire Marvel Universe. This happened after they tried to fix his mind, which is insane by nature, and this unlocked his full understanding of the comics. Of course, Deadpool is known for breaking the fourth wall, but in this story, he is more determined than ever to reach the real Marvel. Along the way, he committed a series of atrocities against heroes he even considered his friends. A good example is Spider-Man, who had his head split open in the streets of New York during his fight against the Merc with a mouth. All the heroes and villains met their end at Deadpool's hands, but some suffered more than others, especially the mutants, who faced brutal deaths from their leader Cyclops to more forgettable members. I could mention Kitty Pryde, who was condemned to stay until death in a cube of mirrors that prevented her powers from working properly to escape, or even Xavier, who tried to enter his mind and had a nervous breakdown, dying instantly. But the ones who truly suffered were the mutants with super regeneration. Those Wade could not kill definitively. He left them chained, and every time they began to heal, a flamethrower would activate, bringing them back to square one over and over as long as they remained alive. But still talking about Marvel, the next character is Johnny Storm. There are very rare cases in Marvel stories that show a member of the Fantastic Four dying. They are most likely the group of characters with the fewest deaths in Marvel. But I'm saying this based purely on a hunch. Even though it rarely happens, it still happens. And one of the most striking deaths was that of Johnny Storm, the Human Torch. While Reed and Sue were away from the Baxter Building on their own important missions, a group known as the Cult of the Negative Zone managed to break into the building and breach the portal to the Negative Zone. The cult unleashed what seemed to be an infinite army of annihilators and sectoid soldiers on Johnny, the Thing, and the Children of the Future Foundation. Franklin Richards managed to push the army back into the negative zone, but nothing was stopping them from returning. The only way to stop the army from passing through the portal was to lock it from their side and randomize the code so no one could enter or exit. The Human Torch made the sacrifice and was killed, which led to some of the saddest stories and funerals in Marvel. Well, he died, more or less. It turns out he was captured and constantly resurrected by healing worms, where Johnny would kill them before fully recovering and then die again. And this happened repeatedly several times for quite a while, so I'm sure dying is better than that, or in this case, dying definitively. And speaking of characters who cannot die, we have Bruce Banner in the future. Bruce Banner is one of the characters with the most alternate future versions in Marvel. One of them being extremely famous, the Maestro. But that was just an example. In fact, it's not about that version of the character that I'm going to talk about, but rather the older version of Hulk: The End. It turns out that Hulk, besides being extremely strong, is extremely resilient, apparently more so than the planet itself. In this alternate timeline, the heroes were unable to stop the nuclear apocalypse, where the world's greatest nations launched their atomic bombs. The vast majority died instantly, and the rest died from radiation, except for Hulk and consequently Bruce Banner. He had to live in a deserted world with practically no life, but not entirely lifeless. Various monsters emerged from the mix of radiation and a planet free of predators. So all the time, there were giant carnivorous insects that in groups could even tear apart the body of the Emerald Giant. Even when trying to end his own life, Hulk never allowed Bruce to join his friends and forced him to live into old age in this devastated reality. But moving on, in one of the worst decisions ever made by a character in all of DC Comics, Mr. Mxyzptlk was tricked by the Joker and gave 99% of his power to the villain. For those who don't know, Mr. Mxyzptlk is a fifth-dimensional imp, a reality manipulator of the highest order. The character can easily destroy and remake the DC universe, manipulate comic book pages, and surpass gods and most entities in the publisher's roster. Now imagine all that power in the hands of the most insane villain in DC Comics. Obviously, the entire universe was on the brink of collapse. Not only were the heroes altered, but entities like an avatar of Darkseid and the Spectre were affected as well. But the one who truly suffered was Batman, who was trapped in an endless cycle of tortures orchestrated by the Joker. The clown prince of crime's mind certainly devised the worst atrocities for Batman. And I say this based on how Batman was left afterward. The Spectre, once recovered after the Joker lost his powers, stated that the Dark Knight's mind was so broken that it was irreparable, even for him. And keep in mind that the Spectre is also incredibly powerful, but the damage was too deep and Batman would remain that way forever. Well, that's by conventional means. In the end, they transferred all the trauma to the Joker's mind, which became even more deranged than it already was, resolving the situation as if nothing had happened. Moving away from Batman's core and going straight to Superman's, the Phantom Zone is an alternate dimension and a very present element in Superman's stories, and few realize how cruel the place is for those who enter it. It was used as a prison for Krypton's criminals, and later Superman followed suit, using the place to imprison some of his worst villains. The Phantom Zone is a plane of existence outside of space-time, with no normal flow of time, physical environment, or biological needs like hunger, thirst, or sleep. Those trapped there are transformed into specters, ethereal beings capable of observing the real world and communicating telepathically, but unable to directly interact with objects or people. Their consciousness remains fully intact, but they are unable to change their state and will remain that way for all eternity. However, in some versions, a conscious entity in the zone restored physical substance to the prisoners, turning the place into an internal battlefield, now deadly and full of monsters. Which is still terrible, but certainly much less worse than it was before, I'm sure. But moving away from Marvel and DC, most of the characters in this video had tragic fates throughout their careers, but Al Simmons started with the worst possible fate. Initially, he was a highly trained assassin, considered the best, but also a renowned soldier who reached his peak by saving the president from an assassination attempt. He was promoted to a higher level in the CIA, where he dealt with matters the government kept secret from the general public. However, Al soon realized that the government wasn't always right and began to question whether his actions were truly just. But his superior noticed that his loyalty was wavering and that Simmons knew too much, killing the character at the first opportunity. And Simmons obviously went to hell. Simmons, upon arriving in the infernal dimension, made a deal to sell his soul to a demonic being known as Malebolgia in order to see his wife again. He was allowed to return, but came back 5 years later as a strange creature from hell, an infernal soldier with no memory of what he had done. After remembering what he had done, he sought out his wife, only to discover that she had moved on, married his best friend, and even had a daughter named Cyan. The character couldn't even reveal himself, as when he took on a human appearance, he was completely different from his original self, and she wouldn't recognize him. It was then that a demonic guide, the Violator, who presented himself as a clown, appeared and said that his fate now was to fight against the celestial hordes and die in battle as just another of hell's many spawns. And to finish, a character who ended up in his situation because of his own actions, Anakin Skywalker. Anakin Skywalker was a promising young Jedi, considered the quote-unquote chosen one of the prophecy who would bring balance to the Force. Born a slave on the planet Tatooine, Anakin was discovered by Qui-Gon Jinn, who recognized his immense potential. Due to Qui-Gon's death, the character was trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi, and during the Clone Wars became a hero of the Republic and master to the young Padawan, Ahsoka Tano. However, the character faced a series of frustrations throughout his career as a Jedi Knight, one of them being never having been granted the rank of Master. His Padawan rightfully abandoned the Jedi Order, and he constantly received visions of the death of Padme and their children, which allowed him to be manipulated by Palpatine. Thus, he fell to the dark side of the Force, betraying the Jedi and attacking not only trained Jedi, but also young Padawans. His fate was sealed on Mustafar against his former master Obi-Wan, where he was defeated and lost both legs and his only organic hand during the lightsaber duel. After being immobilized, Anakin slid to the edge of a lava river where he suffered 3rd degree and possibly 4th degree burns over nearly his entire body. The extreme heat and gases emitted by the lava poisoned and damaged his lungs, causing internal burns and breathing difficulties. When Palpatine rescued him, his surgery was not only brutal but extremely painful, as they needed to preserve as much of his destroyed body as possible to maintain Anakin's power. So he didn't even have the luxury of having burned parts replaced. Everything that could be kept remained with him as they saved his life. Vader's mask became one of the most critical components of his armor and was vital for his survival. Without it, he would die unless he was in the pressurized and controlled atmosphere of one of his specially designed meditation chambers. His retinas were so damaged that the lenses filtered light to prevent further damage and permanent blindness. What remained of his limbs was connected to machines through flesh grafts, linked to damaged nerves to allow movement, and even then he could barely raise his arm during fights. His armor causes constant pain for the character, and he now needs a respirator to stay alive, only able to sleep in bacta tanks, which minimizes constant pain. And it's exactly this character who wraps up today's video. And if you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Leave a like down below. Also, send it to that friend of yours who doesn't know anything about comics and help the channel keep growing. Thanks, and see you next time.